pharmaceuticals, personal protective equipment were going to be in high demand, along with other things that could no longer be carried in the belly of the aircraft. So at that point, we activated 10 aircraft immediately. That rapidly grew to 20. And last week, we had 65 a 777-300ERs as passenger aircraft, in addition to our 11 aircraft. And these have been working flat out to service the needs of not only the United Arab Emirates with its regard to its need for the PPE and pharma and all the other bits and pieces, but also many markets across the planet, Europe, North America, South America, and Oceania. So in some respects, the cash situation was mitigated. Obviously, like every airline in the world today, the pursuit and preservation of the cash situation is upmost and is the overarching imperative. But with this number of freighters operating, and we believe we will be able to get more flying sooner, we are certainly keeping the wolf from the door. But at the same time, that meant that 22,000 cabin crew had to be sort of furloughed, if you like. Well, no, they weren't furloughed. There were pay cuts introduced. I think the cabin crew took a 25% pay cut. The rest of the business, various levels, up to 100%. And but the fact of the matter is that many of them in 380s are still idle, and we are obviously looking after them. They are certainly uppermost in our minds with regard to this terrible epidemic, and therefore we're looking to try and make sure they are safe and well all the time. Now, the question now is the most vexing question: is what is going to happen next? And I certainly don't claim to have a crystal ball in all of this. I have personally been through multiple crises over the years, many in the Middle East and in the surrounding regions, and I've always been optimistic as to the way the companies and the countries within this area have been able to navigate their way through some pretty let's say, bad crises of various shapes and forms, whether they be economic, whether they be geopolitical, whatever. I think this one is a little bit different, and I've often said that the aggregate of all those crises that we've faced in the past doesn't equal this one. And therefore, we need to accept, and I don't know whether there are any economists out there who would say otherwise, that we are likely to face a global recession of some kind, and that, in my view, this is probably an 18-month, very difficult time, turgid times, with a reset probably coming in the back end of next year. That'll be in the November, December, early first quarter calendar of 2021. And in the meantime, we've got to tough it out as best we can. Unfortunately, in the aviation industry, which is in a parlous state at the moment, there's no question about it. And every day we hear about airlines either going bankrupt or going to their governments for bailouts, etc., etc. But it much will depend in this 18 months as to what the governments do themselves. The pursuit of trying to control the pandemic, the various measures that they are taking, which are essential to the well-being of their populations. At some point, there is a stark choice to be made with regard to the preservation or the reactivation of the productive capacity of the countries. And at some point, this has to be revitalized. Otherwise, those countries will find that they are not able to make the payments they would have to for the various infrastructure of their own countries. So I think it's very important that some kind of easing of the lockdown and the movement of sectors of the economy are able to start moving ahead some at pace, I would hope. It's not easy, given that at the moment we do not have a solution in terms of a medical solution to the problem, but I'm pretty confident and I'm very optimistic, but not being a clinician myself, that the production of a vaccine within the next 18 months and hopefully put on global distribution will be the ultimate solution to the problem. In the meantime, the measures taken with regard to the seeking of antiviral therapeutic medicines, the link to the relaxation to an extent of the lockdown measures, but introducing high levels of testing and isolation measures to try and to sort of ease the economy back into some kind of order. But I can't, it's a hugely difficult situation. I think the airline industry and the aerospace industry, and by that I mean not only the airlines themselves, but there are airports, there are the manufacturers, the supply chains into the manufacturers. These are hugely potent engines within the economies of Europe, of North America, and Asia. And they are struggling themselves at the moment. So as demand has diminished so that we are now at a stage where 90% of the airlines fleets are on the ground, trying to manage a very difficult situation, it becomes more complicated. So the sooner we can get some relief and our business working again, so much the better. And again, this is very much in the hands of the politicians whose task is unenviable. It must be absolutely very difficult to deal with economies that are needing to get kick-started at the same time, ensuring that everybody is well and safe from this pandemic. If there is any good news, is that the oil price is way down, so that allows us to operate our freighters at very profitable operations. But I think, like all airlines, we have been caught with the hedge situation that we find ourselves in, and some of those instruments have been biting us rather badly in our cash reserves, and we have obligations we have to make on that. But if we put those to one side, the oil price remains something that we've never really seen before. As far as Dubai and the U.A.E. is concerned, as you probably all know, the government reacted very quickly to this, far quicker than many other countries. They instituted many measures, and both on the isolation front, on the stay-at-home front, etc. They introduced extensive levels of testing, particularly in the various classes of labour that needed to be tested as soon as possible. They were very rapid in introducing economic stimuli to both at the national level, and Dubai introduced its own. The policies have essentially been monetary, focusing on liquidity in the banking system, etc. And so far, so good. But like every other country, the need to get its productive capacity active again and up and running is critical. This certainly in Dubai, in the absence of hydrocarbons, we exist on real estate, financial services, legal, hospitality, of course, travel, aviation sector is very important to the economy in Dubai. So we really need to get this going as quickly as possible, notwithstanding what I said about the stark choice between keeping the R value below 1 in terms of the reproductive rate of the virus, and at the same time balancing the need to get the economy going again. So in a nutshell, I would say that we have a tough 18 months coming up. For some sectors, it'll be longer. Others will say demand for air travel will come back in 2 or 3 years. How will they fly? Will we have spacing on airplanes? How will the airports cope with people entering until we get a vaccine? And how are they going to be treated? How are the transit operations going to work, etc., etc.? These are the vexing questions that the states are going to have to answer. But as I speak, 100% of the countries on the planet today have entry restrictions for foreign nationals. So for airlines like Etihad and Emirates, this presents a unique choice, a unique difficulty, because we are essentially medium to long haul carriers. Unlike the other carriers in, for instance, America and Europe, where they have strong domestic bases, regional bases, and they will activate those sooner rather than later. But to what extent, I have no idea. We can see the aggregate demand probably diminishing over time, as I've said. But importantly, the characteristics of the segments within that aggregate demand are going to change. And we may see some what I would probably call the unknown unknowns. Something out there may not be working very helpfully for us in the next year or two or even 3 years. But as far as these two airlines are concerned, we have been here a long time. We have a reputation of being able to navigate through the most difficult situations. And we are pretty adept at doing that. And because of that, and because we are in an advanced state of readiness, having so many aircraft and so many crew ready to go, it only takes the engineers to rip the blanking covers on, fire up the engines and get everything going. We'll be back in business before you can say, I don't know what, end of pandemic. But we will be operating to as many countries and as many cities within those countries that we possibly can. And the sooner we can do that, the better. Thank you very much.
Tim, thank you. There's a lot there to unpack, and we will do some of that in the question and answer session. But first, Tony, like Sir Tim, I must say you are an institution in the fabric of Abu Dhabi and the UAE. Etihad is just your most recent endeavor, and we thank you for all that you have done to build world-class business opportunities and partnerships in Abu Dhabi. Over to you, please, Tony, for your opening remarks.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and Ramadan Mubarak. Obviously, Tim's covered nearly all of the salient points in my opinion. And we are obviously a smaller version of Emirates and a younger version than Emirates. And previous to COVID-19, we had a number of teenage years related challenges. And as a consequence, we were undertaking a rather fundamental transformation program. We were 2 years into said transformation process. We laid out a 5-year program. And when we announced our results at the end of last year, we were 55% improved from where we started off and a little ahead of schedule. And like Tim, having been involved in aviation for a reasonably long duration, I came into 2020 optimistic off the back of that. And of course, before COVID-19 really took hold, we saw the extension of riots in Hong Kong, volcanic ash clouds in the Philippines, the largest bushfires in Australasian history, the regrettable and disastrous incident with the Ukrainian airline aircraft, which restricted airspace, and of course then the early signs of the outset of COVID-19. So 2020 very quickly became a challenging year at the extreme. And since that chain of events, of course, we grounded our entire fleet on the 23rd of March. And looking out from our window as well, it's a heartbreaking sight to see the fleet parked up. Nobody in aviation likes to be associated with that particular site. And as a consequence, as Tim said, you have to look desperately into this dark cloud for any opportunity. And to date, I would probably characterize the opportunities that we've sought to pursue as follows. One, as Tim has covered, is maintaining vital air cargo supply lines, food, pharmaceuticals, two very important cases in point. We have 6 777 freighters, and as Tim's mentioned, we also very quickly concluded that deploying an element of our commercial fleet would be advantageous. And today we've operated 31 aircraft from our fleet of 104. A call out for Boeing and people on this call that are associated with the supply chain to 787. We've deployed all of our Dash 10s and our Dash 9s, some of our Dash 9s. The efficiency of that machine, as coupled with the fuel price reductions, has kept us in the game. And whilst using exactly the same vocabulary as Sir Tim, it certainly doesn't keep the wolf from the door entirely. Every dollar, of course, helps in a crisis like this. We've also embarked on the biggest maintenance program in our history. So the fleet, whilst it's grounded, is undertaking what we would characterize as Project Cabin, where we are surgically and clinically lustering the cabins such that they look like the day they were received into service. We're taking the opportunity to make sure that the high standards that have always been set by Emirates and Etihad are used as an opportunity to move the bar even higher. We've put opportunity into looking at Project Restart, like I guess most businesses all around the planet at the moment, i.e. plotting a series of strategies as to when the finger goes on the trigger of the starting pistol, we can get out of the blocks as fast as possible. And in some ways, we're building logic off the back of the freighter network that we're deploying with those commercial aircraft. Off the back of that, similar to Emirates, we've been repatriation flying. That has been largely, as you can imagine, one way, albeit we, like everybody else, are desperately seeking for the opportunities to represent themselves, or present themselves, such that we can connect flying back here. But as has already been covered, this is an extremely complex global challenge and subject to many, many variables. And governments have to make some very, very difficult decisions, particularly in regard to wellness on one hand and the ongoing damage to economies on the other. And I think, as I've characterised it within the Etihad family, in an environment in which the only constant is uncertainty, we have to try as best as we can to embrace the ambiguity and guard ourselves for looking for false certainty. And I guess, therefore, what I'm trying to say is, whilst all of us would use logic to say that there will be an end, that's a fact. There will be a return to growth in aviation, that's a fact. I imagine what none of us know is when either of those two things will happen and how long it's likely to take. On a personal level, I happen to share Tim's view that it will be a minimum of the back end of 2021. It may even go further out into 2022, dependent upon all manner of other factors. I would call out the amazing support from the many suppliers that are on this call today, who have supported us in our hour of need, in taking cost out of the supply chain, in deferring payments, and in helping us preserve ourselves for the opportunity to come out of this. Equally, our staff have been stood down in the same way as been described. All the management is on a 50% salary reduction, everybody else 25%. Sadly, we have had to make redundancies, quite sizable redundancies, which is unfortunately inevitable in this situation. And because the transformation program that I referred to earlier is 2 years in progress, in some ways, I'm glad we've been in the gym working out, because if we'd have gone into this cold and perhaps carrying too much weight, I think what is already the biggest challenge I've certainly ever faced, and I imagine many others have witnessed, I think it would be an awful lot harder. So I guess I'd finish by saying, whilst one is a natural optimist at heart, and I think, the industry has shown a remarkable ability to pivot, to adapt, and to move on. I think this one will challenge every one of us. And the fact that we're all in it together means that we're more likely to take the jar of Brave pills for breakfast and do some of the harder things in life that are often ruled out when you're resetting businesses in situations where not everybody's affected by the same problems at the same time. And again, I think the incredible support from the supply chain and the business partners in the United States and the United Kingdom and everybody else that we interact with is one of those things that for me is a symbol of the test of an enduring relationship is in the difficult times, because of course anybody can play at it in the easy times. This is definitely difficult, but I've got every confidence we'll come out of this together, inshallah.
Tony, thank you. You made an important point there at the end that I want to come back to regarding partners and members in the U.S. and the U.K. and business community. But let me start. We received a number of questions on the chat function. Let me start at the macro and the micro level, and because we have so many questions, let's try to keep the responses, the answers pretty short and to the point if we could. First, everyone wants to know when you're going to start flying again. I know you don't have the specific answer to that, but anything more that you can say in that regard about when you think you will have passenger operations back up again? And with that, what measures do you think you're going to have to take to ensure the safety and security of your staff, of your team members, and of course of your passengers? What should we as potential passengers on your platforms be thinking about and be prepared for when we think about traveling again on Emirates and Etihad? Over to both of you to make a few comments in response to those questions. Tim, you want to go first?
Okay. Starting to fly again, as I said in my remarks, we're ready to go within 48 hours of being able to fly. Now, at the moment, the United Arab Emirates has a no-fly policy apart from the segments that I mentioned. That's one thing. Secondly, the countries to whom we fly, we have no visibility of what their access requirements may be. As I said earlier, virtually all countries on the planet have some kind of restriction, whatever, which makes the ability to plan our operations more difficult. So we have to wait and see, one, when the United Arab Emirates relaxes the rules here, and also the countries that we're currently flying to. For instance, in the United Kingdom at the moment, they're debating whether they should introduce a 14-day quarantine for foreign nationals coming into the United Kingdom. It's one of the few countries that doesn't do it. Now, if that happens, of course, then that'll be a dampener of demand. There's no question about that. But we already see that in other countries today, whether it be in Oceania, Australia, New Zealand, or other places. And as you know, the United States has a ban on flying between Europe and the US. As far as what will happen, again, it's not so much. We would like to think that everybody would be able to travel in the manner that they always did, that our cabin crew are already dressed in PPE. We already have those designed and up and running. But what happens in airports? What are the rules about airports? What is the rules for transit? What about the staff of the airports themselves, which are voluminous, within something like Frankfurt or Sydney or Heathrow or New York? What will will there be a uniform set of protocols designed by, let's say, the World Health Organization to impose upon the aviation community, which, as I said, there are many facets of that. I really can't say what they're likely to be. We've heard about passenger spacing. All your participants will know about passenger spacing, but that only works laterally. When the person sitting behind you, whose head is 25 inches from yours, sneezes, the propellant of the sneeze goes 20 feet down the cabin. So what do we do about that? And all these things are going to have to be judged. We, as an aviation community, we know what we would like. What the reality is, once the government interventions come into play with regard to their own rules, is something else. So I'm afraid we're going to have to wait and see for both when we start and when we do start, how we manage. But be assured, the airline industry cannot afford to have large numbers of its seats idle. It would be absolute economic catastrophe, worse than the current situation is. And many will not fly their airlines on the basis of rules that make passenger spacing so difficult to make the break evens. And of course, eventually, if that is imposed, fare levels will triple. So, Tony.
That's a very important point, Sir Tim. Thank you. Tony, do you want to comment on that from the standpoint of your staff, your passengers, and when you think Etihad might be getting up and going again?
I think ditto to everything Tim's already said. I guess from a staff point of view, like Emirates' family, ours has been absolutely exceptional. So, for example, we've got thousands who are acting as volunteers at the moment, serving meals, supporting people who are affected by restrictions from COVID-19. But the reason why I start with our staff is, first and foremost, we want to assure their health and well-being. And in that regard, we're going through an extensive testing program whereby we'll be able to assure that the whole of our family is tested negative, and therefore, the interaction between us and the guest is a safe starting point. I think there will be a wide range of products that will be developed, and probably in blend and or combination will provide the kind of standards that we will become accustomed to in the months to come. But there's clearly no solution on the shelf. There is no hard guideline. There's no reference today. But I almost kind of go back in, the last 3 decades of things that have had a seismic impact within aviation, largely around the security-related challenges that we've witnessed in the past, to which over time there has been global guidelines and or legislation that have then become the new norm. And I wouldn't rule out on a personal level if we observe, a similar set of changes, particularly when an antivirus has been identified and hopefully is industrialized and available enough to be able to give people the ability to prove from a wellness certification point of view that they have taken said medication. But how that's going to play out at the moment, my crystal ball is no better calibrated than anybody else's.
Thank you, sir. Gentlemen, we've received a lot of questions about the overall health of the aviation industry writ large globally. You've touched on those, you've mentioned those. Any other points you might want to make on the risks of the industry going forward, of various airlines surviving? Been a lot of questions in that vein about Emirates and Etihad potentially merging as a result of this in the future. I know very well you guys have done a lot to consolidate some of your back-end functions and sharing services and things like that. Just to answer the question about the future of the industry broadly and anything that you each might want to say in that regard. Tony, why don't we start with you and then to Sir Tim this time?
Oh, I guess you can probably imagine that and I know Tim have probably been asked that question, more times than we can count. And of course, whilst I'd like to think Tim and I are friends, we're also healthy competitors. We operate 2 independent airlines. We compete on an open basis with one another. If there are opportunities in a non-competitive way to take advantage, we've been grown up in exploring them. But in terms of any open, particularly in the media, people are always wanting to speculate around this. My response is not surprising. There are no plans at all that I'm aware of that are on the table. And should they ever become considerations, it would clearly be for the respective shareholders.
Tim, are there any opportunities for new code shares going forward with other carriers around the world for either of your airlines to maximize capability coming out of this crisis?
Well, it depends which airlines are left in the mix. And I believe that the diminished capacity offering, I think we all have to accept this, that in the next 18 months, 2 years, even 3 years, the number of airlines flying around and what they do and their production rates are going to be quite a lot less than they are today. So the notion that we would find some way of cooperating, you mentioned some kind of interline deal, et cetera, is something that would be one of those attempts to kind of consolidate traffic flows on diminished production. Now, this will be the shape of things to come. How the industry will be configured, we have major alliances at the moment. How they will roll out, I haven't, it's anybody's guess as to how that will work. But the industry has got to reshape itself on demand, which is probably at the moment we're at almost base zero. To build that up over the next 2 years back to probably 60-70% of where it was by 2023. And as you asked the question earlier about what is the state of the industry, well, let me be quite frank about it. That in the absence of state intervention of some kind or other, 85% of all airlines will be insolvent within 2 or 3 months. It's as simple as that. That is why you're seeing the likes of KLM Air France getting 11 billion, Lufthansa asking for 10 billion. The US carriers had the first tranche of the 50 billion that was already out. I think they've had about 25 going now. And throughout the airline world, you see state intervention. And therefore you can see the criticality of the situation at the moment. And it's one of those things where, as I said earlier, the stark choice that governments have with regard to protection and the welfare and the health of their populations traded against the rather frightening realities, economic realities of what's going on in our case in aviation, but it's also manifest in hospitality and a lot of the other areas that are going to facing this same kind of problem. So, but yes, interline is one of the possible way forwards. We face the usual rigors of anti-competition or competition law. Maybe those are the kind of things that maybe will have to be reviewed with regard to the preservation of the airline industry and the criticality of what it is for the global economy. And there'll be lots of other things where airlines, if they're allowed to, and you mentioned Etihad and Emirates, well, it's a classic case. Maybe there is something that Tony and I should be doing in a far more constructive, fleshy manner to deal with the situation. But as Tony says, and I have said very often, that is in the hands of the shareholders. And if they deem it worthwhile, a good idea, that's what they will do.
Thank you, Sir Tim. As the U.S. looks to providing support with our stimulus packages to our airlines, and you consider stimulus support from your shareholders to your airlines, how does that affect open skies and your commitment to open skies? I would assume it's even stronger, but I want to give you guys a chance to each say a word about that, please. Tony, why don't we go with you?
Well, I guess the very quick short answer is it changes, in our opinion, nothing. In the sense that, we have a commitment that was linked to a plan that was in place in any event. whilst this is a seismic shock to the development or the continuation of said plan, that commitment for us to be able to be completely cash flow sustainable as a result of the transformation plan goes without question. We're going to have to pivot and do things that are even harder and probably even more unthinkable now in order to achieve that objective. So the commitment's unwavered. The whole premise, I guess, you could probably say ironically, was the fact that this part of the world was favoured with, government support in a way in which other markets, US and Europe, believed that was many years since that had been the case. But, extraordinary circumstances that everybody is now dealing with, of course, have meant that governments have had to step in the US, have had to step in some places in Europe. And as Tim said, without which many of the airlines that we're all very familiar with today probably won't make it, certainly past the end of the year, many of which will probably fall long beforehand.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of that. This is a black swan event. It's a situation, certainly in my career, and I don't believe the airline industry, the aerospace industry, has ever been subjected to anything like this. And therefore, governments need to do the right thing to preserve the industries, not just the aerospace and airline industry, but other industries, and get them up and running again. But does that negate in the case of aeropolitics, open skies has been one of the driving forces of liberalization in air transport over the last 30 years, and the benefits that all countries, including the airlines, have had from it. There is absolutely no reason to change that. Actually, what they should be doing, if the states do have some kind of conditionality with regard to the bailouts, they should be saying to the management, we want you to actually free off access. We want you to be far more expansive, and you must accept competition so that the countries benefit from all of that going forward out of this crisis. So the notion that you would change the open skies fundamental tenets of its raison d'etre, so to speak, would be folly in my view. Get the job done. Do what you need to do. This doesn't cover aviation. We already know that wherever there is some kind of injection of state aid in Europe, for instance, it breaches competition law. But hey ho, let's be realistic. Let's be pragmatic. Get the job done. That does not stop us returning to the status quo, which was a good, healthy way of conducting business both regionally and internationally.
Thank you both. Let me just turn, if I quickly could, make a comment or two regarding airports and services. Very, very important, and as you say, all interrelated here. Hospitality industry, all of our members on the line, from Marriott to Viceroy to Jumeirah, all of this very, very keenly important to them as well. Regarding business partners, we had a number of questions, first of all, about your cargo business, and are there any opportunities to open new cargo routes given what's going on, like Bangladesh or Mauritius? And then also regarding your immediate platform partners like Boeing and Airbus, how does this change your relationship in any way with them? Your commitment to the 77X, 777X, your commitment to any of the Airbus platforms? Anything that either of you would like to say about those issues? And what I want to get to at the end of this is, what do you need from American and UK, other European businesses to help you do your job and meet your challenges even more so than what you have now? What can we at the Business Council and our members and partners help you with, bring to you that you might not have? And I'll end there. Go ahead, gentlemen. Sir Tim, go ahead.
Okay, in the first question of all your participants and the partners in the the council. And I'm very, very mindful of the fact that airports, services, hospitality, etc., have really been hammered by this, particularly in hospitality, where hotels have closed, airports have closed, etc. So we're all in it together, and I think, as I said in my earlier remarks, we've got to tough this out over the next 18 months at least. I can't offer any solace on that, but as soon as we get flying again and we can start oiling the cogs of international travel, we will be there as quickly as we can. As far as cargo is concerned, with regard to some of the, we have a large number of routes that don't touch Dubai with regard to our cargo operations. We're serving from Asia into Oceania. We're going from Asia directly into the United States. Obviously, quite a lot is coming through here. But our European operations and our South American operations, we did a pharma and PPE charter into Sao Paulo about 10 days ago, of which we took about 40, 50 tons down there. So it's an ongoing thing. And in terms of what can people do, it's almost like saying, bear with us, help us out where we need it. It's a two-way thing, being a partnership, of course. We're very mindful again of our relationship with the primary aerospace manufacturers, both Boeing and Airbus. We realise that we have significant obligations in terms of aircraft orders, etc., etc. But like so many things, they are in the mix of the new construct of what the industry is going to look like post 2020 and 21, 22, 23. And I make no secret of that. And I think both Boeing and Airbus, from what I understand, are taking measures to adjust to the harsh reality of that situation. But like every business at the moment, they are affected as we are. And hopefully, again, I circle back to the thing I've said, the sooner we get going, the better.
Thank you, Sir Tim. Tony, please.
Again, ditto really. From the cargo side of things, we're flying to places over the last month that we have never connected to previously, and they're a function of the extraordinary circumstances of taking out the amount of previous belly hold connectivity from the air cargo market. So, as I mentioned before, we've got 6 777 freighters, but they were only around 1/3 of our capacity. All the rest of it was in the belly hold of the rest of the fleet. So you park up the fleet, de facto 2/3 of your capacity is gone. Rates go up, obviously, pharma in particular, some foodstuffs and many other aid packages, therefore have an urgent need. And we've been taking every opportunity to service that need, and will continue to do so. But I guess your kind of third part to the question, which is what can people on this call do to help? In simple terms, I guess it's back to we're all in it together. Most airlines will only have, days, if not weeks or months of cash left. And therefore, if it's about products, goods and services, as I've almost joked at times in saying to people, there's only 3 commodities that can pay in the context of Etihad. That is cash, sand and love. We've got plenty of sand because the desert's full of it. We've got plenty of love because I've got a warm heart. I've just not got any cash. The problem with that is I'm running out of love as well, because I'm feeling somewhat bruised by the whole affair that we share together. So unless you want to convert the sand, we're in it together. And I guess therefore, without being overly flippant about it, it's all going to come back down to cash flow. It's all going to come down to the long-term gains that people are prepared to take in the test of an enduring partnership. Because if parts of the alliances, if parts of the partnerships take a short-term view, the cash, I can guarantee, will run out very, very quickly, if it's not done so for many already. That will only leave us with sand and love. We've got to play a long game.
Tony, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, as we come to wrap up this webinar, I just want to highlight the incredible charitable activities that both airlines have also undertaken to help their staff and those less fortunate around the world in weathering this crisis. To learn more about what the Emirates Airline Foundation is doing, you can go to www.emiratesairlinefoundation.org. And with Etihad, Etihad has a similar program in combating the pandemic where you can donate miles if you want. You can go to the Etihad website, donate your Etihad guest miles to support the vulnerable refugees during the novel coronavirus pandemic. These are two noble efforts on both of your parts. Do you want to say one word or two each about those programs before I conclude the program here, please? Tony, to you, and then Sir Tim.
Yeah, I think, look, in global humanitarian challenges like this, ultimately what will set all of us apart will be, our humanitarian response and the humility that goes with that. The Etihad family, as I mentioned before, we've been absolutely humbled by the extent to which people are happy to volunteer, the way in which people are happy to support the needy. At the moment, we've got Etihad Ramadan boxes. We've done a unique delivery service with Zomato, which is a kind of doorstep delivery service online over here. So our catering facilities are now producing meals for those sectors, for example. As you mentioned, Danny, we've got all manner of online gifting programs, and if you can go to Etihad.com, whatever little any of you can do to support it will, of course, be very gratefully received.
Thank you. Sir Tim?
Well, I'll be fairly brief. You might rightly mention we have the Emirates Airline program, foundation, which is now 17 years old. So we've done a lot of good works over that period of time. I won't go into the level of detail, but we do rely on contributions gained from our passengers when we fly. So you can imagine, in the last 5 or 6 weeks, without any passengers, we're diminishing our cash reserves on that one as well. So any contributions we would be most grateful to receive, because we have to maintain, not only do we build many projects, the ongoing financial support of those projects is down to the foundation. And again, we rely on contributions. So, and we are facing a little bit of a cash crunch at the moment. So we're hoping that we can find other sources, ways and means of getting cash, so we can get them back into the projects, of which there are many across the developing world.
Thank you, Sir Tim. Ladies and gentlemen, the U.S. Business Council has an aggressive schedule of programming on the books for the next 3 weeks before the Eid al-Fitr. We are hosting webinars with senior U.S. and U.A.E. government leaders, as well as senior business people in key and important verticals. Please take a look at the new website we've unveiled at usuaebusiness.org for an updated schedule and to get a better sense of all the bilateral, trade, and investment work in which we are involved. Ladies and gentlemen, Sir Tim, Tony, thank you for joining us today. Ramadan Mubarak, thank you, and we appreciate so much your partnership. Have a wonderful day in the U.A.E. and a wonderful day in the United States and Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.